Well, I titled this, I'm actually writing a book now. I'm going to use these materials in the book, and I'm trying to decide what nouns to use as I contrast a vice with a virtue. Yeah. So I've written in my notes here, overcoming gluttony with sobriety and contentment. I could just have, well written, overcoming gluttony with moderation and temperance. Yes. I just haven't decided yet. When do you find yourself consuming too much of a good thing? Too much of a good thing. This seems to be just a natural pattern in my life. On the Enneagram, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, this was something that I was introduced to through Renovare. A woman on the Renovare staff has written a book about the Enneagram, and different character traits are linked to specific numbers on the Enneagram. And you take a test, whether it's valid or not, I have no idea, but you take a test, and you get a number. And so I took this. I took this test. I was with the board at Renovare, and I asked them, "What number do you think I am?" And without pausing, a number of them said 7. 7. Well, 7. There's good qualities to a good 7. We don't a 7. We don't need to go into those today. But the besetting sin of a 7 is gluttony. The besetting sin. I remember when I was talking to my wife, Debbie, about this Enneagram result. She immediately responded, "You're not a 7. You're not a 7." And I said, "Well, that's what the test said. You're not a 7. She, quote, "You're very disciplined when it comes to food." And I thought to myself, well, there's a reason. But then I said, well, I'll take the test again. And you have to agree with every response I make to the questions asked. Well, I'm a 7. And Debbie was surprised. What that means is that at the drop of a hat, hand me a box of donuts, and though I should eat only one, I'll at least be tempted to eat 3. And if no one was watching, 3 might soon be devoured. What's interesting about this sin of gluttony is most North Americans don't ever think about it. It's one of the 7 deadly sins. Now, a deadly sin is one that can kill your soul. So these deadly sins are very serious, very serious. I'll treat this one with some modicum of humor because it hits so close to home for all of us. But North Americans don't think about it much. How many sermons have you heard on gluttony? That's what I mean. That's what you probably heard sermons about certain sexual behaviors. You probably heard sermons about something like greed, which is related to our money. You've probably heard sermons along that line. That was very interesting. I didn't know whether to ask, how many on gluttony? And the response from the group was none. Interesting. Across the years, across the centuries now, gluttony has been a frequent topic amongst writers. Not infrequently commented on, preached about, spoken about. So I'm sensing there might be a blind spot in our culture, a toxicity in the air regarding this specific vice. So let's listen to some of these writers. Some of them you'll find humorous, some they might hit especially home. I don't know. Well, there's the ancient Greek hedonist Philoxenus. a Greek hedonist, he wished his throat was as long as a crane's. Now, a crane in Christian art is a symbol for gluttony. How so? He wished his throat was as long as a crane's, so as to better savor each morsel as it went down. And he actually wept. This is not a Christian man, it's a Greek hedonist. We don't have time to talk about Greek hedonism today. But he actually, it is said, wept because the felicities of eating could not be spread over his entire body. I ran across this in Suetonius. He's a Roman historian. Quote, the most notorious feast of a series of feasts given by the Emperor Vitellius, he describes, given to him when his brother returned to Rome. So this is the feast, return of his brother from a triumph, probably a battle. Here's the feast. 2,000 magnificent fish, 7,000 game birds are said to have been served. Yet even this hardly compares in luxuriousness with the tremendously large dish which Vitellius dedicated to the goddess Minerva and named Shield of Minerva, the Protectress. So it's interesting, he's connecting his feast with an idol. This is the recipe. Pike livers, pheasant brains, peacock brains, flamingo tongues, lamprey milk, and the ingredients, Suetonius writes, collected in every corner of the empire from the Parthian frontier to the Spanish Strait, were brought to Rome by warships. I wonder how the warriors on those ships felt about carrying flamingo tongues to Vitellius. Seems extravagant, doesn't it? Bit self-indulgent. Clement of, this is the funny one, I find it funny. Clement of Alexandria, a church father familiar with desert teaching, notes the connection, catches the connection between self-indulgence, greed, and Roman extravagance. Quote, those who take delight in what they have hoarded up in their storehouses are foolish in their greed. It is farcical and downright ridiculous for men to bring out urinals of silver, chamber pots of transparent alabaster, as if they were introducing their advisors. And for rich women in their silliness to have gold receptacles for excrements made as though being wealthy, they were unable to relieve themselves except in a grandiose style. That's Clement of Alexandria, a sober church father. I think he's chuckling when he wrote that. Here's Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas defines gluttony as an inordinate an inordinate desire for food and drink. Now, an inordinate desire would be an exaggerated desire, a disordered desire, an extravagant, self-indulgent desire for food and drink. And Thomas says it brings forth 5 daughters. It brings forth 5 daughters. Now, do you remember? We've talked about this with Rebecca's book, Glittering Vices. Often the 7 deadly sins, from them sprout other sins. And you have these, in medieval art, you have trees of vices. But they're all springing from the 7 deadly vices. So what springs from this one? Well, Thomas says it has 5 daughters. Inappropriate pleasure, surliness, that's interesting, isn't it? Surliness, uncleanliness, stupidity, and habitudo mentis, which may be roughly defined as mental slowness. How about Dante? In the Inferno, Dante has placed Giaco the hog. Giaco the hog stays stupefied on a pile of garbage with his head down and afflicted with strabismus, crossed eyes, symptomatic in medieval medicine, not in ours, in medieval medicine for habitudo mentis, mental slowness. So there's something when Dante probably building on Aquinas, when they think of gluttony, they're thinking of someone who's basically very slow mentally, not thinking clearly, wondering why would they act like that? William Langland, the writer of the allegorical poem Piers Plowman, probably some of you have read that, Piers Plowman, writes this, describing the glutton. And to drink all days in diverse taverns, to gobble food on fasting days before the fitting time, and then to sit upping until sleep assails them, and to grow portly as a town pig, and to repose in soft beds till sloth and sleep sleek their sides. Shakespeare. Falstaff, Henry IV. He describes Falstaff like this: that huge bombard of sack, that stuffed cloak bag of guts, that roasted Manningtree ox with the pudding in his belly. Lawrence Cunningham. Lawrence Cunningham, might note that name. He's got a great, small, accessible, great book on the 7 deadly sins. He says, he talks about a painting, a famous late medieval painting by Hieronymus Bosch. Some of you might be familiar with Hieronymus Bosch, where he depicts the 7 deadly sins. In portraying gluttony, Bosch has a corpulent man gorging himself at a table, while off to the side stands another man guzzling from a wine jug. The key to the painting, however, is a child fruitlessly pulling at the seated figure and begging for something to eat. Bosch's point is that the glutton is so preoccupied, think about this, so preoccupied with his own needs that he cannot see the needs of another. That scene tells it all. Cunningham writes, it's a striking image of the old definition of the sinner. I smiled when I read this. The old definition of the sinner, incurvatus in se. Curved in, curved toward, turned or curved inward on the self. So the gluttony is someone who sits down to eat. And often a glutton is described in this literature as eating by himself. Not eating with anybody else. He's focused simply on his food, which goes against the grain of what a good meal is supposed to be about. You have a good meal with your friends, with your companions. Companion, compane in Latin, compane, with bread. That's where the term comes from. So when we eat with friends. I'm looking at you, some of you I've enjoyed a number of meals with, compane, companions. Now let's bring this up to date a little bit. Cunningham comments on what he describes as horrific signs of gluttony in our culture. He was cruising the TV with his remote, and he ran across a number of sites that disturbed him. Quote, "A new phenomenon has caught my eye that is beyond boring." He was bored. Beyond boring. It's disgusting. Competitive eating. Oh. Competitive eating. He writes, "Whatever possesses people to try to eat dozens of hot dogs in a limited period of time. Is there not something revolting about such an enterprise? To my queasy horror, not only have hot dog eating contests become popular on television, but they have actually been deemed sporting contests." No. Sporting contests. To add insult to injury, he writes, "There was a series on the Travel Channel. This is now on the Food Channel. I've seen it. The Food Channel. There's now a series on the Travel Channel featuring a rather porcine young man who accepted challenges in various eateries around the country to finish impossible confections of food in a set period of time. It's evidently thought that a human being sitting down in front of a 6-pound sandwich with appropriate sides and stuffing the mixture stuffing the mixture in his face in an hour is a feat to be admired." I have seen that show. That's why I'm chuckling. I've seen the show, and he's a young guy. I don't know if I would describe him as porcine, but there's a fair heft to him. And he will travel from restaurant to restaurant, and crowds of people will gather. They will gather to see if he can eat an absolutely enormous quantity of food within an hour. And they're cheering him on. I'm back in Rome. They're cheering him on. To see if he can do it. Like that, one would think you would cheer on an athlete to accomplish perhaps a more praiseworthy task. And we're right back in Rome. In Rome, people would feast together for parties, and then they would visit what was called in Latin the vomitorium. They go to the vomitorium, empty their stomachs, and come back and eat more. They weren't enjoying what they were eating. Rather, they were trying to eat as much as possible and see if they could survive. Comes to mind, there's one Roman general who was hanging out with this emperor I mentioned named Vitellius, and he said, "Thank God I was getting sick. If I had kept that up, it would have taken my life." So we might be surprised to find that we're gluttons or not. Here are some of the key terms and thoughts of the desert dwellers. How would you define gluttony? Now, we heard Aquinas' definition. What characterizes a gluttonous person? Is gluttony a vice that only concerns food? I wonder. Can we be a glutton for other aspects of human life that are genuinely praiseworthy, something God's given us to enjoy? But we engage in whatever it might be in an exaggerated, self-indulgent posture, and it ends up wounding us.
Isn't that where that expression, a glutton for punishment, comes from?
Yeah, that's right. The young, now here's Rebecca. She defines gluttony as feeding your face and starving your heart. Fred Buechner writes, "A glutton is one who raids the icebox as a cure for spiritual malnutrition." I was writing this morning, and I thought, that's right. A phrase is now, it's not entirely recent, but now we have the expression comfort food.
Yes.
Comfort food. We're all going to encounter challenges in life where we're going to get stretched beyond what we can bear. On a given day, things at home, things at work, whatever it might be, and we feel so stretched. And now we have this phrase, comfort food. Now, Rebecca and the Desert Dwellers and Fred Buechner and so on will all argue at that point we should be turning to our relationship with God. God created food. God thinks food's a good thing. Jesus was accused of being a wine bibber and a glutton. Jesus was accused of that. But there's something here about a desire for a good thing. This just ripples into all the vices. A desire for a good thing becomes disordered when the desire for that good thing becomes an end in itself. So I can sit down and have a wonderful meal with folks. I think of myself, though, not stuffing myself. I'm sitting down and I'm talking, enjoying another person's company, and the evening comes to an end, and we all smile about how good a glass of wine was, how good the food was, but no one's walking out. This would be part of what a desert dweller would say. Nobody's walking out filled. Nobody's walking out and going to be suffering from a hangover the next day. Enjoying good things, but not in a disordered way. God wants us to eat. If we don't eat, we'll starve to death. So God thinks that food is important for human beings, God's precious image bearers. If we start with an ordered desire and govern our reading, maybe I'm a glutton for reading, Freudian slip. Debbie would say yes, yes. If that ordered desire slips into a disordered desire, then the cultivation of new habits, the desert dwellers say, can replace that response that's so closely connected with our body, our nervous system. If we fall into gluttony, we've trained ourselves. I'm not fed until I'm full. I'm not fed until I'm full. I just naturally, that's my default position. I'm not fed until I'm full. And I think the Lord, and I can hear my wife saying this, yes, you are. You are fed. And feeling full, think of the poor. Feeling full, stuffed, that would be a good word, stuffed, would be something the desert dwellers would feel uncomfortable with. You don't need to do that, they would say. And if you do that, your relationship with God and your relationship with other people, your neighbors, will be affected because you put your own needs, your own self, at the center. I repeat this. This is my last time with you on these vices, so I'm going to beat you to death with it. If we put ourself at the center, which is the default position for our culture, God's truth, it's the default position for our culture. If we put ourselves at the center, we'll never find what we're looking for. That's why young people are killing themselves in droves. Because they've been told, seek yourself. Make yourself the source of meaning for your life. And young people, now getting a little bit older, are trying to do that. And what are they finding out? Life doesn't work like that. It's not working. This is you two, I'm not finding what I'm looking for. Well, of course not, because God's meant to be at the center. And then God can ripple out into ourselves, because we're God's precious image bearer. You put the self at the center, life will implode. And this vice illustrates that. Why did I write this? Listen. So if we desire to eat, we start with an ordered desire. We should eat. Of course, there's eating disorders nowadays that really need to be treated on a medical level. No doubt about it. But there are some folks who have a disordered relationship with food simply because they want their bodies to look a certain way. These would also, I would probably argue, also be, I experienced it when I used to make my way over to Planet Fitness. You know, you walk into Planet Fitness, non-judgment zone. Well, I appreciate that, because I'm walking in, nobody look. But then when you start getting up on the treadmill or whatever those things are called, when you're on the elliptical, you sense, it's in the air. You sense that people are watching other people. They're watching. And though it's a no judgment zone, they're making judgments. And the goal for almost everybody, this is hyperbole for the sake of illustration. The goal of almost everybody is to change the way they look so that they will be noticed, so that they will be loved. Loved. What I wrote here. So if we desire to eat, we start with an ordered desire. If the desire swells beyond its proper boundaries, it's disorder. Now think about that. Walk out of here with that today. Proper boundaries for our appetites. All the vices relate to that principle. Proper boundaries for our appetites. If they swell beyond those boundaries or desires, they're disordered. I confess now. I can have an ordered or desire for donuts, Merlot, steak, or chocolate bonbons. One donut a week, ordered. 3 donuts every morning, disordered. Get my point? So to be direct, human beings have gone bad. We're incurvatus in se. We're curved in on ourselves. And in that present sinful state, we easily desire good things. All these things we're mentioning, every vice has its source in a good thing that's being abused in some way. We desire good things like this in a wicked, exaggerated, immoderate fashion. I tossed in wicked because I thought that would catch somebody's attention. A wicked, exaggerated, immoderate fashion. Not in moderation, immoderate. Appetite for food, sex, friendship, entertainment, diversion can run wild. I have no idea why Snoop Dogg is so popular with women. I don't understand that. I understand that. He exploits women. He produced a series, just came to mind when I saw Wild there, he produced a series of films called Girls Gone Wild. Making money, and he's popular. He was on the basketball game the other night, and I just want to say, stop showing that man. too much of a good thing. Excess. Now, if we're in curvatus and se, we are wired for excess. We're wired for it. So, through the power of the Spirit, formation of new habits, the desert dwellers would say, we'll say with the metaphor of wiring, change the wiring, reset the gauges, learn to bridle our naturally unbridled self. We're apt to gorge rather than eat, lust rather than love. Here's the point. And all the time, we celebrated the Eucharist this morning, all the time, God wants to fill us with himself. He wants to say, let me take this self, our default position, let me take that self and put it on the periphery. Let me put myself, God, at the center. Life will begin to make sense. It won't make sense, dear one. He says, dear precious image bearer, it won't make sense if you put yourself at the center. And I don't know if it began like this, but starting with a book like I'm Okay, You're Okay, things begin to splinter. The Lord would say, no, you're not okay. No, you're not okay. Serious problems. Well, I won't feel good about myself then. That's all right. You shouldn't be feeling good about these things. Let me give you a treasure trove of wonders that are true of you in relation to me to replace the false messages we've picked up. We're largely responsible, some of us, since the 60s. I'm at the University of California in the late 60s. I know. I know. So the desert dwellers would ponder the uncontrolled, self-centered ego, the I that views God and others as listings in a catalog titled Meet My Needs. And we put God there. The Lord would respond, well, all right, I'll meet your needs. It's going to sting. It's going to sting. It might hurt. The surgery is radical because the problem is radical. I want to heal you. I want to straighten you out. Bent creature that you are, my precious image bearer. The desires of the sinful self that I've been describing in some detail, the desires of the sinful self are inexhaustible. We can't cover greed. I'm going to connect greed to what we're doing today. That it was mentioned, I think, in a sermon here a couple weeks ago. Rockefeller. Well, Mr. Rockefeller, how much do you really need? Just a little bit more. Inexhaustible. Left to ourselves, a gaping black hole at the center of our soul that can never be exhausted. So what the desert dwellers offer us with this particular greed and with all of the virtues they describe to us and encourage us to practice is freedom. Freedom is such a good thing. Freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from greed, freedom from vainglory, freedom from anger, freedom. And then we find ourselves, Lord says, let me give you back yourself. But always in relationship to me. I'm at the center. You're not. You'll never be at the center, and that's a good thing. You'll be unhappy if you try to live with yourself at the center. So this unbridled self needs to be controlled. That's why we have this phrase in English, self-control. Sometimes you just got to slow down and think through, oh, that's interesting. Parents are always trying to teach their kids, I would think, you're going to have to grow up and be self-controlled, not self-indulgent for this particular vice. The self-centered self is like a runaway train, rolling down the tracks at high speed in danger of flying off into oblivion at any moment. The tracks are meant to guide, stabilize, and control, but the train's furnace is blazing too strongly, producing too much energy to be controlled. The tracks are meant to guide, think about this, the tracks are meant to guide and harness the power. And if the train's traveling at a safe speed, the tracks do that. The train reaches its destination. Too much power, too much desire, what the desert dwellers call disordered desire, and the train will jump the tracks. It's a law of physics. It's a law of physics. And in terms of spiritual formation and spiritual health, this is a law, what we're talking about is a law that is guaranteed to work this way. Disordered desire is characterized by immoderation. Way too much of a good thing trying to replace the best person. God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, what do we try to do? Grace, filled with the grace of God and power of the Spirit, what do? We practice moderation, self-control, self-discipline, with the help of a good coach. Well, back to Clement of Alexandria. Remember him? Talking about urinals and other things. He writes, quote, self-discipline applies to everything else for which the soul, he calls it, lusts improperly, because it's not satisfied with bare necessities. Necessities are really important. If human beings don't receive what's necessary, what happens? They die. They starve. Starve in lots of different ways. But he says, stick with the necessities. Quote from my wife, almost every day. You don't need that. You don't need that. Yeah, I do. You don't understand. I'm so hungry. You don't need that. You don't need that. Such a gift. Clement distinguishes between things necessary, food for instance, and an immoderate desire for food. So moderation, as we've seen with these other vices, we can practice moderation in many areas of our lives. Our speech. Think about our speech. Remember I asked, what's your word history? I think I asked that. Our speech may be moderate or immoderate. On the airwaves today, I declare it from the mountaintops. Immoderate speech. Immoderate speech. Our desire for possessions, ordered to what we need, with an occasional, special special something, or immoderately exercised toward what we want. I want it, and I'm going to buy it. I can afford it. Everything, now listen, everything hinges on the nature of our desire. What we eat, speak, write, possess, love, all these things. For the desert dwellers, they advocated one immoderate desire. One immoderate desire. If you want to have an immoderate desire, have this one. Immoderate desire for God. Immoderate desire for God. So there's one desert dweller. We don't know too much about him. I ran across him, and probably, I don't know where I ran across this guy. His name was Benjamin. And Benjamin wanted to create, we talked about impression management last week. So Benjamin wanted to create an impression of being a moderate monk, his appetites under control. And so at the end of some days, you get a special treat, maybe extra muffin or whatever, and he would pocket that muffin. He'd pocket that muffin. And then, by all appearances, people would think, oh, look at Benjamin. He's not eating the extra muffin. And then what he would do, this is gluttony, what he would do was when a few days had passed, perhaps weeks had passed, he had a supply of muffins, and he'd stuff himself. God bless him, he'd stuff himself. We shouldn't be surprised that in the literature, Benjamin left the desert community and went back to Alexandria. So here are some things that have helped me. I can do this, I think, fairly quickly. Some ideas, some from Rebecca, some from me. You might consider fasting. See your doctor first. See your doctor first. You might consider fasting. Some folks shouldn't fast from food if that's a medical issue. So you can fast from other things. You can fast from film. You can fast from books. You can fast from whatever you sense you're loving immoderately. Try that on for size. I practice, with me it's food. It's food. So I know when I get to Fridays, the previous evening at 8 o'clock, this is not a big deal. At 8 o'clock, I have to stop eating. And there's a little voice that's saying, you're going to be fasting the next day. Before 8, have a big snack to carry you over. Oh, okay. I begin it, you might try this on. I begin on Thursday night, 8 o'clock, not eating, and I don't eat until the following day at 5. When I first started to practice that, forming a new habit, when I first started practicing that, I can remember I was at Eastern. After 2 hours, I was thinking, oh, this is impossible. It's impossible because my body had become accustomed to feeding itself whenever it wanted to. You can see, I think, how these issues would relate to one another across the vices. Start slow. Start slow. There's other ways to develop the virtue of moderation. Have a chocolate bar when you'd like to eat a whole one. Simple as that. Fill your wine glass halfway rather than to the brim. At mealtime, this is really a good one, I think. At mealtime, stop eating before you're full. And then you still feel a little bit hungry. And at that point, we can start thinking about the poor, because that's the poor's experience all the time. And in some small way, we can identify. I mentioned other things we can fast from: film, sports, the computer screen. I'm going to stop with this. Well, actually, never fast on a Sunday. Never fast on a Sunday. Sunday's always a feast day. It's always a feast day. So you don't fast on Sundays. Even during Lent, you're not supposed to fast on Sundays. So you can have a Haagen-Dazs bar on Sunday. The key question is this: am I turning to food or any other good thing for happiness I've meant to experience in my relationship with God? Finding comfort in God, not in food or something else. Where in my life do I habitually want too much of a good thing? Oh, sports. Sports. We can want too much of a good thing. I know, I love baseball. I appreciate the Jersey buzz. I love baseball. I love the Phillies. But it could become an immoderate desire. If I was taking 8 hours a day studying stats about the Phillies and so on, that's immoderate. Watch a baseball game while I'm reading something else and glancing up occasionally, that's moderate. It takes, I'm going to close with this, it takes wisdom to deal with the vices. Wisdom to deal with the vices. And what's wisdom? Comes from the grace of God. Wisdom is knowing how to live. Knowing how to live. And if we know how to live, we will reduce the amount of suffering in our life exponentially. And the suffering we experience in some ways might well be the grace of God as we join in, like Paul talks about in Colossians. We join our suffering to the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, Paul writes, which is the church. I tossed a lot at you. Food for thought. God bless.